Good morning, all participants. Today with us today we have a multidimensional personality with us, Dr. Adarsh Kumar Dureja, my longtime friend. It's my proud privilege to introduce him to you, and it is very interesting to know, that a person can be involved in so many activities simultaneously. See, he got B in mechanical engineering from Government Engineering College, Jabalpur, Madhya Pradesh. Then he subsequently did his MSc in engineering from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Afterwards, he completed his PhD from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. At present, he is working as Associate Dean at Homi Bhabha National Institute, HBNI, Mumbai, an autonomous university of BARC. In addition, he currently holds the post of Scientist H, a very senior position in Bhabha Atomic Research Center, Mumbai. Previously, he worked in the area of engineering design and finite element analysis of nuclear reactor components in the Reactor Design and Development Group of BARC. His expertise in the field of modeling and simulation of linear and nonlinear structural problems using finite element analysis technique, and he has over 25 years of experience in solving structural problems using finite element simulation codes such as NISA, ANSYS, Abacus, etc. In addition to simulation work, he has designed and engineered an experimental setup for 4-point bend creep test for measurement of creep deformation of tubular components at high temperatures. He had developed an experimental facility for determination of thermal contact conduction also. He was also involved in life estimation and management of reactor structural components using tailor-made computer codes and its implementation for real-life scenarios. These tools have been effectively utilized at reactor sites for online life estimation and decision making for active life improvement of the components for service. In HBNI, Homi Bhabha National Institute, he was instrumental in developing the network with various institutions of national and international repute, in getting MOUs, memoranda of understanding, signed with various institutions, which are now facilitating the students to take up courses and to get expert guidance from faculty members of these institutions as well, in addition to the faculty members of Homi Bhabha National Institute. He regularly teaches a course on finite element method to trainee scientific officers at BRC Training School. Therefore, dear participants, we have today for this session with us a researcher, an experimentalist, an FEM expert, and a teacher, Dr. A.K. Dureja. He is going to talk to us on the topic usage of finite element technique for product development and design optimization. So, with this brief introduction, I request Professor A.K. Dureja to take over the session. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Professor Nayak, for giving a nice introduction. So, am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir. You are audible to all of us.
Yeah, thank you. So, I'll share my screen.
Your screen is visible, sir, but आपका वो presentation नहीं दिख रहा है अभी.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It is not visible.
Have you kept it open?
Yeah, I kept it open. It is open. It is
Okay.
open on my desktop. Just let me know.
You just check, yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
I think if it is PDF, you can see the icon on the right side at the bottom in the taskbar. Click on that.
I'm doing that only.
Achha.
Okay, now it is visible.
Yeah. Yes. Great. You can make it full screen. or
Yeah,
maybe increase the size slightly so that it becomes readable. Yeah, great.
fine, right?
Yes,
Right?
sir. Yes, sir. Please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay. So, good morning, one and all. The topic of my today's presentation is usage of finite element technique for product development and design optimization. My name is A.K. Dureja. I work with Homi Bhabha National Institute at Anushakti Nagar, Mumbai. So, as we all know, we are talking about a field which is known as computer-aided engineering. And if you divide this computer-aided engineering, we have two major parts of this. One is known as CAD, another is known as CAM, that is computer-aided design and computer-aided machining. So finite element analysis becomes a part of computer-aided design and analysis. And we have three parts of it. First part is known as pre-processing, where we develop the model of the structure which we want to analyze, in which we model the geometry, specify material properties of the structure of the construction, and then we define the boundary conditions, loading condition, and all that, and then we submit this job for the analysis, that is analysis simulation. In that, if you are not satisfied with the analysis results, like stresses are more than the desired stresses, then we can change the dimensions and then do optimization. And all this we need post processing module to do that. And on the left hand side, you can see a model of a ship, which talks about that a finite element analysis. It's not that we do only a small part analysis, but a full vehicle or full ship or any aircraft structure can also be modeled. And it may be involving various finite elements for doing this analysis, like potential elements, 3D elements, beam element, bar elements. So it may be a combination of various kinds of elements. So we talk about what is the scope of the analysis, what is the purpose of the analysis, and at what scale we want to do the analysis. So sometimes we may be interested in doing a small scale single part optimization, so that we are modeling the intricate details of each and every corner of the component, so that we know the detailed stress analysis of that particular component. And once we do this component analysis, our components are qualified. Sometimes we will be looking for a full vehicle analysis, like a large scale simulation, vehicle crash worthiness analysis, in which we may not be interested in knowing what is happening at individual part level, but we may be interested in knowing what is happening to the whole body of the vehicle or aircraft or ship, right? So both of these analysis may employ the same software, but with significantly different models. What I mean by saying significantly different models is, in one of that, where we are optimizing the component itself, we might have modeled each and every intricate details of the component. While we are doing a large scale simulation, we might have just replaced it by a rigid link or a bar element or a beam element and things like that. So we are not actually interested in the component itself, but we are interested in the whole body of the vehicle, what is happening to that. Now, CA is changing the face of the world. As you can see on the top left, we have a conventional tire, but the kind of deformation and loading which it is subjected to, now we are trying to see that what kind of changes we can make, so that the amount of material required is minimal and the cost can be reduced, and simultaneously it can perform in a much better way. So having known this analysis, now we'll move to the representation. How do you represent these structures in the finite element model? So this is my geometry. I'm saying this is the geometry. This I beam is a geometry. And if you look at that, depending on what kind of analysis we are looking for, we can represent this geometry by various finite elements. Okay. So what I mean to say is, see, if you are looking for what kind of stresses are getting generated in the web, what kind of stresses are generating in the flange, if that is my interest, I should model it as a 3D solid. That is the volume. I should discretize this volume into different 3D elements and do the analysis. If that is not the case, only thing I want to know what is the warpage of this section and things like that, then I can model it as a 2D surface. So I can discretize this using shell element. Suppose that also I'm not interested. I just wanted to use this element as one of the structural elements which will be connecting to different kind of structures. This is I want to just use as a load transfer element. Then I can use it as a 1D line. So I can model it as a beam element or a bar element depending on the boundary condition. So see, same geometry can be modeled as 1D element or a 2D element or a 3D element. Okay. So what I've gathered from the coordinator that 1D and 2D has already been covered in the previous lecture. So today I will concentrate more on 3D elements. So this just I've listed that what kind of geometry we can have and what kind of finite element models we have. So if you are talking about a geometry as 1D line or curve, so we can have beam element or a truss element, which is known as bar element, or a axisymmetric shell, axisymmetric thin shell. Then if you talk about a 2D surface, if you discretize your geometry by 2D surfaces, we can have a plate element or a shell element. Or in case of this is plate and shell, basically when we talk about theoretical thing, when we talk about plate and shell, we are basically talking about transverse loading. And we are talking about a 2D surface like membrane loading, so we can have plane stress or plane strain or an axisymmetric solid, or we can have a 3D volume, we can have 3D solid elements. Okay, so we'll talk about 3D solid elements. So there could be different components which we may be interested in understanding the behavior of this component. So these are some of the examples of mechanical components which we will be interested in understanding its behavior under various operating loads. So basically there are two kinds of elements we use for discretizing any solid model in finite element. One is known as tet mesh, that is tetragonal mesh, and a hexagonal mesh. Okay. So these are the typical examples of some kind of a finite element mesh for a particular component. These are some of the examples where we are showing the mesh of a particular component using some tetragonal mesh or hexagonal mesh. And we can have a combination of the elements, like here you have solid element, here you have shell element, and the shell elements and solid elements are connected through a beam element and things like that. To talk about some strained fundamentals of this, we have, as we know that in case of 3D, we have 6 strain components, like normal strain, epsilon x, epsilon y, epsilon z, gamma xy, gamma yz, gamma zx. These are the 3 shear strain components. And this is the stress strain relationship for a 3D. So we have 6 stress components related to 6 strain components through this D matrix. Now, if you talk about the simplest 3D element, so we have a tetrahedron element, which is a 4-noded element. So it's a linear tetrahedron element. Node numbers are 1, 2, 3, and the vertex at 4. So we have 3 degrees of freedom for displacements like U, V, and W along the direction of X, Y, and Z. So we have 3 degrees of freedom at each node, and we have 4 nodes. So we have unknown nodal degree of freedom vector is 12 cross 1. So you have U, V, and W displacement at node number 1. Similarly for node number 2, node number 3, node number 4. So we have a 12 cross 1 is the nodal displacement degree of freedom vector. And if as we know that as we have to define this polynomial in a finite element technique, we have to a priori choose what kind of polynomial will be suitable for representing the deformation behavior. So what we do is we are writing U, V, and W as functions of X, Y, and Z. So this is the constant parameter which is required for rigid body motion, and you have a linear function of X, linear function of Y, and linear function of Z. Now we have as we have 4 unknowns in for U, 4 numbers for V, 4 numbers for 4 unknowns for W. So we have total 12 unknowns. So now we know that these values also at the nodal values. So we can find out what kind of a relation it will develop with the shape function, so that we can represent these unknown values as compared to the nodal values as compared to the unknown quantities like A1, A2, A3, A4. And these are the quantities which represent the shape functions like N1, N2, N3, N4. So we are getting a shape functions for this. As we know that these shape functions are the quantities which connect these nodal values to the unknown values inside the domain of the volume, right? So these are the various alpha, beta, gamma, delta parameters which has come from this shape function. And this is the volume of the tetrahedron which we have used. And you know that because these are the basically the displacement degree of freedom, that is U, V, and W, how they are connected to the nodal values. That is what we call it the shape function. The functions which relates nodal values to the displacement quantity inside the domain of the element is known as shape function. So by writing this matrix, what we are showing is U equal to N1 U1 plus N2 U2 plus N3 U3 plus N4 U4. So it's a linear combination of U1, U2, U3, U4, and similarly V, similarly W. Okay, and we have already given what are the shape functions for this shape function for this element. So this is the field variable which is connected to the nodal displacement vector D. Now we know that for writing down the stiffness matrix, we need to know the B matrix and D matrix. And we have already defined for 3D elasticity what is the kind of D matrix. The D matrix is the matrix which relates stresses to the strains. So that we have given 6x6 matrix. Now we have to define the B matrix. As we know that the B matrix comes from the definition of the strain vector. As we know that epsilon x has been written as dou u by dou x. And dou u by dou x u can be written as n1 u1 plus n2 u2 plus n3 u3 plus n4 u4. So if I take the first partial derivative of this safe function with respect to x, y, and z, then we'll get the B matrix. So I partitioned this B matrix B1, B2, B3, B4. That is the B matrix corresponding to node number 1, corresponding to node number 2, 3, and 4. So if I write down the B1 matrix, that is the first order derivative of safe function with respect to x. That is this I'm writing as dou n1 by dou x, dou n1 by dou y, dou n1 by dou z. So I get this as populated as the matrix which relates strain vector to the nodal displacement vector. So basically, if you multiply with the nodal displacement vector, that is u, v, and w, what we get is dou n1 by dou n1 u1 by dou x. So we get, if you sum it up, you get the strain vector like epsilon x. So if you now partially derivatives n1, that is what we had written for n1 here. N1 is alpha 1 plus beta 1 x. If I take the partial derivative of n1 with respect to x, I get beta 1. So that is what I have written beta 1 here. Similarly, you get gamma 1, delta 1, and for the shear strain components, you get gamma 1, beta 1, and things like that. So basically, this line represents epsilon x, this line represents epsilon y, this line represents epsilon z, and these lines represent gamma xy, gamma yz, and gamma zx. Okay. So this is the B matrix, and similarly, matrix we can write for node number 2, node number 3, and node number 4. So basically, we'll get a constant matrix because these beta 1, gamma 1, delta 1s are nothing but the nodal coordinates. You can see that this alpha 1, beta 1, gamma 1, delta 1, all are functions of the nodal coordinates, and nodal coordinates are nothing but the constant values. So basically, what we'll get is a constant value of this matrix. And we know that B matrix is also a constant matrix. So if you multiply that, you will get a constant number of a stiffness matrix for a tetragonal tetrahedron element. So this was all about a linear tetrahedral element. We can discuss more about 10-noded tetrahedral also, because right now what we have studied is a linear tetrahedral. So we have only corner nodes. If you look at the second order variation of this element, so what we have to do is we have to introduce a mid-side node. So we have actually 6 edges. So if you introduce 6 more edges, 6 more node points at the mid of this edges, then we'll have 6 nodes added to this element. So we'll have a 10-node configuration, 10-noded element, which is known as we can say quadratic tetrahedron element. So that is another version of this. And let us look at another version of as far as geometry is concerned. As you said that we can have a tetrahedron element or a brick element. This is the most popular element, which is known as 8-noded hexahedral element or a brick element. So what we have is we have a cuboid kind of structure, and we have 8 corner nodes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are the corner nodes. And we know that we can always write x equal to ni xi, that is n1 x1 plus n2 x2 and n3 x3 and all that. So we have summation going out right from I equal to 1 to 8. So n1 x1 plus n2 x2 and n3 x3 and all that. And if you write down the safe functions, as we know that the safe functions can be written by the method of zeros. So what we have is an axis of we call it psi, eta, and zeta axes. So if you write down the equations of those planes where that particular node is not present, then we can write down safe function as in terms of is a general equation which I have written in terms of if you substitute the value of nodal coordinates for a particular node, you are going to get the safe function for a particular node. Just to elaborate more on that, suppose if you want to write down for safe function for node number 1, what we can do is we can write down the equation of this plane, top plane, right plane, and the bottom plane, and then a constant can be matched so that you get a value of 1 at its nodal location, that is at node number 1. So same kind of philosophy we can adopt for all the nodes and write out the safe functions. Similarly, a quadratic form of this 8-noded element, as we know that now there are 12 edges, so we'll have to introduce 12 more nodes to this particular element, and so we'll get a 20-noded element. And for writing down the safe functions, the philosophy we follow is we follow a serendipity form of element. where we say that first you write down the safe functions for all mid-side nodes. That is, this is the mid-side node. So we'll get a quadratic. Just one second. So a quadratic form of this element. So what we have done is we have introduced a mid-side node. So what we do for writing down the safe functions, we use serendipity formulation. We write down the safe functions for a particular mid-side node, and once you finish the writing down the mid-side node, what we do for this corner node, you write down the safe function for a linear element, and then because if you're deriving a safe function for a linear element, and if you plot this safe function, what you will get is a value of 1 at its nodal location and 0 at other nodal location. So if you plot that 0 to 1, you'll get a value of half in all mid-side nodes. So what you do is you write down the safe function for node number 4 as a linear element, and then reduce the value of half of the safe functions for node number 11, node number 17, and node number 12. So with that, by doing this, basically what you are doing is you are imposing a condition that the value of safe function is 1 at its nodal location and 0 at all other nodes. So that is the philosophy which is adopted for writing down the safe functions for a quadratic element. Now, having studied this, we'll go to another structural element, which is known as plate and shell element. Okay, so we'll study this plate and shell. So as an example, what we can see is these are the various examples of a plate structure where we have a flat structure. These are the basically a hull where we are having a plate. This is basically a water gate where we are having a plate, or a rooftop where we are having a plane structures. So what kind of analysis or what kind of a finite element we should use for this kind of structure, how to optimize its dimension and things like that. And if you talk about a thin shells, there are various structures where you can find out what are the thin shells. And in case of transportation industry, we talk about the ship or we talk about an aeroplane. So basically all these structures are shell. So how to do the analysis of that? To look at the consumer goods, you have a lot of structures which are shell, which are very thin shells, but they can take a large load. Just to give you an example, if you think of an eggshell, it's a very fragile cell, right? But we say that if you load it actually, then you can take a large load. So basically, even if these shells are very small, and if the loading is truly axial in nature, it can take a very large load, because the amount of load you are applying is trying to change the curvature of the membrane in the circumferential direction, and that strain is very small, so that you can take a very large load. So these are the various thin shell structures which are shown here, and these are some of the various structures which you see in the nature as well. So basically, when we talk about plate and shell elements to do an analysis, our target of structures are basically thin-walled structures. So these are various thin-walled structures which I am showing here. So what we do is basically we make a solid model, and out of that solid model we extract the mid surface, and because these are all 2D elements, because these are 2D elements which are subjected to the transverse loading. See, what we have studied in 2D element like plane stress element or plane strain element, the loading is in plane. That is, we are getting a membrane load. But here, what we are studying in case of plate and shell, we are applying the load in the transverse direction. So these are various structures like thin-walled structures. So what we can do is we can model it and then extract the mid surface of that, and then that mid surface can be discretized using finite element. So these are various examples which I am showing here. So basically, this is the actual structure, maybe chassis of the vehicle, and then what you can do is you can extract the mid surface of that, and that mid surface can be modeled using a 2D plate shell element. So these elements are having thickness as their property of the element, not actually you are modeling the thickness of the plate. So this is another example of a stiffened plate where you are having a plate and the bottom we have beams to strengthen it. So we have two options, like what we have shown is idealization 1 and idealization 2. So this is the stiffener has been modeled exclusively as a shell element. So this is the top elements which are representing the plate, and this is the bottom which is representing the stiffener. And if you are not interested particularly in understanding what is happening to the stiffener, you can as well imbibe this stiffener as a beam element. So there will be one more set of elements running throughout this length, and those will be beam elements. And the beam elements will have the property of the stiffness, moment of inertia, and things like that. So both the idealization will work nicely. Only thing, as an engineer, we have to decide whether we want this analysis of this stiffener separately, or we just want to have understand the effect of this stiffener on the whole deformation pattern of the plate. So that is what decision we have to take, and accordingly we can model it. Now, if you talk about plate and shell structure, as we know that the mid surface of the plate is flat, and the mid surface of the curve shell is not flat, and one of the dimensions is very small as compared to the other dimension. So we are able to utilize the plate and shell finite element technique for analyzing this structure. Otherwise, we would have to go for 3D analysis. So basically, thinness and flatness is the major properties of a plate structure. Now we can have a membrane loading as well as bending loading. So this both kinds of loading can be there. So this is membrane and bending response of a plate element. Now this is what I was telling that this is the actual structure. This is the thickness of the structure. What we do is that we take the middle surface, and that middle surface becomes our mathematical idealization. So this is the boundary, and this is the domain which we will discretize using finite element. Now the question comes, what would be the thin plate? So now there are two theories which are related to this kind of structure. One is known as thin plate theory, another is known as thick plate theory. Now the question arises when to use thin plate theory, when to use thick plate theory. So based on the literature, there are two parameters which have been defined. One is known as R1 parameter, another is known as R2 parameter. So R1 parameter defines as minimum span dimension of the plate, because the plate will have length and width. So whatever is the minimum span dimension that we can take, divided by the thickness of the plate, will give us a R1 parameter. Similarly, maximum deflection of the plate divided by the thickness of the plate, so that will give us a R2 parameter. So based on these two parameters, we can define what case we are looking for. So there are three cases which are happening here. Is just one sec, please. So if the R1 parameter is more than 10, then we can say that the plate is thin. That is, the thickness of the plate is very less than the other dimensions of the plate. And if the R2 parameter is less than 0.2, what we mean to say by saying this, the deflection of the plate is less than 20% of the thickness of the plate. Then we call it a small deflection problem. And similarly, for if the R1 parameter is more than 10 and the deflection, that is R2 parameter, is more than 20%, we call it a large deflection problem. Similarly, for thick plates, if the R1 parameter is less than 10, that is the thickness of the plate is less than 10 times 10 parts of the small dimension of the plate, we call it a thick plate. And if the deflection is less than 0.2, then it is a small deflection problem. And we are not envisaging a large deflection problem for a thick plate, because it's a thick plate, so we are assuming that the deformation will be small only. So there are two hypotheses which covers these two kinds of structure. For thin plate, we use Kirchhoff hypothesis, and for the thick plate, we use Mindlin and Rizner hypothesis. So as far as Kirchhoff hypothesis is concerned, there are some assumptions for this. So we call it a thin plate theory, or we call it CPT also, that is classical plate theory. So the assumptions are plate is thin, and there is no deformation in the middle surface of the plate, that the middle surface acts as a neutral plane. Then the plane section initially normal to the middle plane also remains plane and normal after the bending also. So that if you talk about a metal element which is perpendicular to the surface, that remains always normal to the middle surface, and the stresses normal to the mid surface is small. That is if I take that x and y is the plane of the plate and z is the thickness of the plate, then sigma zz is very small. That is what we mean by doing this assumption. Similarly, for Rizner-Mindlin hypothesis, that is used for thick plate theory, or we call it first order shear deformation theory, the plate is thick and the transverse shear effects are taken into consideration. So these are the two kinds of theories which we'll discuss here. As far as the stresses, as we said that this stresses is small, and the transverse shear stresses sigma x, sigma zz is very small as compared to the other stresses. we see that suppose this is the plate. This is the plate on which there is some pressure loading, and suppose we have a simply supported case on all along the boundary of the plate. So the transverse normal stress is sigma z, and the transverse shear stresses are sigma tau xz and tau yz. And as we are suppose the dimension of the plate is small, that is L cross L, and we are applying a uniform pressure of P. So if you look at the load equilibrium, that is the load P applied multiplied by the area of the plate, that is L into L, equal to the transverse shear stresses, that is tau xz and tau yz. Because see, this plate is supported all along its circumference, all along its basically the edges. So basically the stresses would be either sigma xz or sigma yz. And supposing that it is supported at all the four edges, so two edges will be supporting tau xz, two edges will be supporting tau yz. So the area which is supporting the load is 2 into L into T. So if you see that what would be the magnitude of tau xz and tau yz, so it comes out to be PL by T. Okay. So the order of the stresses is, you can say that P times L by T. Okay. So if you are saying that it's a thin plate, then L by T is minimum 10. We said that more than 10 we call it as thin plate. So the transverse shear stresses would have the order of the magnitude of 10 times the load. P is the load, right? That is sigma zz is P, and transverse shear stresses is of the order of 10 into P or more than 10 into P. Similarly, if you talk about the bending stresses, then sigma x and sigma y, we can prove that by doing this simple bending formula like M by Z. We can find out that P into L by T whole square would be the order of bending stresses. That is sigma x and sigma y. Okay. So this is minimum would be 100 P. So that is what it substantiate our argument that the transverse shear stresses and the bending stresses would be much more than the sigma zz. So sigma zz, transverse shear stresses are of the order of minimum 10 P, and the bending stresses of the order of 100 P. So we can neglect P with respect to 10 P and 100 P. Now coming back to the kinematic assumption, which says that the normal remains normal. So if you see that if the normal remains normal, we can always write that. Now we are basically why we are doing this is basically we have discretized this red plane, right? Because that is the mid surface. So we have discretized, but we want to know what is the kind of U deformation here, here, and all that, or what kind of V deformation here. So what we have written is in the kinematic assumption, we are assuming that the rotation equal to the slope. So theta equal to dou W by dou X. So if I multiply this Z dimension at a particular, see all these layers will have some amount of Z value, because this is Z equal to 0. And if you go upper side, it is Z equal to plus. This the bottom side, if you go Z equal to minus. So suppose if I am interested in understanding what is happening at this particular layer, what is the kind of U deformation it is getting subjected to. So what I can do is, I know the Z ordinate of this particular point. I can multiply it with the rotation, and the rotation is nothing but the slope, because W is my independent parameter, and I can always find out what is the kind of U deformation at that particular point. So although I have utilized, although I have discretized using only 2D elements, I am able to get the full picture of the plate deformation. So that is what we mean by this kinematic assumptions of U and V. Now, if you look at the strain displacement relation, we know that there are 6 strain components as far as 3D structures are concerned. Now, having these assumptions, we can always write out what is the value of epsilon x, epsilon y, epsilon z. So we know that by the fundamental definition of epsilon x, dou u by dou x, we can substitute the value of u. For the kinematic assumption, we know that u is written as minus z dou w by dou x. So if you substitute the value of u, you get these are the strain components. This is the strain component in the y direction. And we know that because we are modeling only the mid surface, so W is not a function of Z, right? So we are writing W equal to W of X and Y only. So we get W by dou W by dou Z as 0. Similarly, for the in-plane strain components like gamma XY is written as dou U by dou Y plus dou V by dou X. So if you substitute the value of U and V from our deformation pattern, we get this as the this is the your in-plane shear strain component. And if you substitute the value for strain components like gamma YZ, gamma ZX, the suitable quantities, we get 0. So basically, we are having only 3 strain components. Only 3 strain components as epsilon x, epsilon y, and gamma xy. So these are the 3 strain components. So this is my strain vector, that is epsilon x, epsilon y, gamma xy are the 3 strain components. Now I'm looking for strain curvature relationship. We know that the double derivative of deformation can be always written as the curvature. So kappa of x equal to dou square W by dou x square. So we are writing epsilon of x equal to minus z it was written as dou square W by dou x square. So we are replacing it by kappa x, kappa xy, and kappa xy. So this is basically the twist. These are the curvatures of deformation, and this is the twist. So and kappa xy is known as the twist of the middle plane. Now, if you look at the stress strain relationship, so epsilon x is for 3D case, we write epsilon x equal to 1 by sigma x minus nu times sigma y plus sigma z, and for similar other relations. So now you substitute the value of sigma x and substitute the value of epsilon x, epsilon y, epsilon z, and you invert this relation, we get a relation between stress and strain for this case. So we have three stress components, sigma x, sigma y, tau xy, in terms of the three strain components, that is epsilon x, epsilon y, and gamma xy. Now let us worry about what is the kind of variation of these stresses in the domain of the plate. So if you look at that, sigma x and sigma y, these are the bending stress component. So this is sigma x and this sigma y, which is linearly varying across the thickness of the plate. So if you are applying a force from the bottom of the plate, you are having a compression at the bottom and tension at the top, which was expected, right? And this is the in-plane shear stress, that is tau of xy. So this is the in-plane shear stress, tau of xy, complementary shear stress. And you have a transverse shear stress, tau of xz and tau of yz, which is parabolic in nature. So these are the stress variation along the thickness of the plate. And as you are applying a pressure Q here from the bottom of the plate, and there is no pressure applied on the top of the plate, so there will be variation of sigma zz, although it is not shown here. Will be some kind of we get some cubic polynomial variation of the sigma zz from the bottom to top. But as we have already said, this is very negligible as compared to the other stress components. So we have neglected it here. And because of this variation of these stresses, we'll have the moments and shear forces getting generated here. So because of this sigma x, we have m of x, tau of xy getting generated m of xy, and the transverse shear stress like tau of zx and tau of yz causes shear force q of x and q of y. So this is basically the force equilibrium diagram of a plate element. And because of this, moments are getting generated because there is a variation of stress sigma of x from the bottom to the top of the plate. So sigma x, if I take a small ligament here and see the variation of sigma x, I need to integrate this sigma x from the bottom fiber of the plate to top fiber of the plate, that is minus t by 2 to plus t by 2. That is, I'm assuming that t is the thickness of the plate. Then variation of sigma x multiplied by the r, at what distance this particular stress is acting, that is sigma z, integrated over the whole thickness of the plate, we are getting a value of m of x. And it is customary in case of plate and shell to define these moments as per unit length. So we have multiplied by the unit length. So 1 sigma x into z into 1 multiplied by the z, integrating over the thickness of the plate, give us the moment, resisting moment. So these are the various equations for the bending moments, and these are the various relations for the shear forces. Now we will worry about what is the relation between moment and curvature. So I know moment can be written as minus t by 2 to t by 2, variation of sigma z multiplied by z dz. I can substitute the value of sigma x in terms of the strain quantities, and strain quantities can be written in terms of the curvature, and I can integrate it out and find out what is the kind of relation which exists between moment and curvature. So what I'm getting is m of x equal to minus e t cube by 12, 1 minus nu square kappa x plus 2 kappa y. So basically these are the curvature terms, and there is a constant for a particular plate given, because t is the thickness of the plate, e is the Young's moduli, and this is the Poisson's ratio. So it gives, we know that in the standard terminology we call it the flexural rigidity of the plate. So I'm getting a relation m of x equal to minus t kappa x plus nu kappa y. So this is the moment curvature relationship. Similarly, we can find out for moment for y and moment for twisting moment m of xy. So this is the kind of relation which relates moment to the curvature. If you find out, if you want to have, because we are solving finite element, so we have to know what is the governing differential equation for the plate. So this is basically an infinite decimal element for the plate where we are applying a pressure, and these are the resisting forces. If you write down the force equilibrium, you will get a 3 equilibrium equations, that is in terms of shear forces and in terms of the moments. Now, if you can substitute q of x and q of y from these equations to this particular first equation, we'll get a relation which will convert all these equations into a single term, which is delta square. We have substituted the value of q of x and q of y in terms of mx my. So this is the relation. Now, if I substitute the value of mx and my and mxy in terms of the displacement component, that is w, so I get this partial derivative equation, and which can be converted into a fourth order partial derivative equation, which looks like this. Okay. So ultimately what we are seeing is we are having a partial derivative equation in terms of an unknown quantity, which is only W. So as far as field quantity is concerned, if I discretize W only, or if I have to call a finite element equation, I have to discretize only W. If I find out the value of W, any other thing like finding out the stresses, strains, or other components of deformation like U and V, we can calculate. So this is the only independent quantity which we need to discretize. That is the W. As far as boundary conditions are concerned, there could be two kinds of boundary condition, like the plate is fixed at one end. So what kind of a deformation it will have? So there will be no deformation, like no W equal to 0. Similarly, there cannot be any slope. And if it is simply supported, then again there is no deformation and the moment can be 0. So these are various kinds of boundary conditions which we may have to solve for. Now, based on the equations, we can always calculate what is the having calculated the moment, what will be the value of the stresses. This is all part of the post-processing thing. So once you calculated moment, we can always calculate what is the kind of stresses. So these are some kind of stress computation I have shown. I'm not going into detail of that. As far as bending stresses, I have already shown pictorially here. Say these are the bending stresses: tension at one plane, compression at another half. Similarly, in plane shear shear stress. Similarly, for the transverse shear stresses and transverse shear forces. Okay. Now we know that in case of finite element technique, what we do is we write down the strain energy. That is nothing but epsilon transpose sigma epsilon dV. To find out the strain energy, we have three strain components, three stress components. So this is the strain energy. Now, if you write down if you want to find out the potential energy is defined as strain energy minus potential of the load. So suppose T is the traction acting on the plate. So T deformation, that is the T traction force acting multiplied by the deformation, integrated out the whole boundary where the force is acting, and that is the potential of the load. So if you subtract potential of the load from the strain energy, what we get is the potential energy. So strain energy minus potential of the loads gives you the potential energy. And what we try to do is we try to minimize this potential energy with respect to the unknown quantities and find out a stationary solution, so that we can find out what will be the configuration after supporting the load. Okay. So what is the simplest finite element as far as thin plate structure are concerned? So this is our domain of analysis, omega. And so if I want to discretize using the simplest finite element, so we know that in case of 2D surface, triangle is the most simplest element. So this is the triangular element. Now we say that as far as the degree of deformation, degree of freedoms are concerned for this a particular triangular plate element, thin plate element. So we have one transverse displacement, that is W, and there are two rotations, that is theta x and theta y, right? Basically, W is the only independent variable, but we can always write theta x and theta y in terms of the slope. Like theta x can be written as dou W by dou y, and theta y can be written as dou W by dou x. Okay. So these are the 3 degrees of freedom for a simplest plate element, 3-noded plate element. So totally we have 9 degrees of freedom for this plate element, 3 degrees of freedom at each node, and there are 3 nodes for this particular plate element. So that is what is 3 nodes I, J, and M, and theta x is nothing but dou W by dou y, and theta y is nothing but dou W by dou x. So if you look at the element displacement vector, this displacement vector for this particular element has got 3 components. One is coming from the node number I, another is coming from node number J, and another coming from the node number M. Okay. And for node number I, we know that there are 3 degrees of freedom, that is Wi, theta xi, and theta y. Similarly, for node number J, Wj, theta xj, and theta yj. And for node number M, theta Wm, theta xm, theta ym. Okay. So these are the 3 degrees of freedom at each node. So our elemental displacement vector is 9 cross 1. Now, if I write down the strain vector epsilon x, epsilon y, epsilon gamma xy, we know that these are as per the definition. This is the vector which describes epsilon x, epsilon y, gamma xy. Now we know that how to write W in terms of the shape functions. We can always find out. We know that the B matrix is the matrix which relates strain vector to the nodal displacement vector. So we have to figure out what is the B matrix. So we can substitute the values and find out what is the B matrix. Similarly, sigma x, sigma y, tau xy, how they are related to the strain vector. So basically, this gives you the D matrix kind of thing. So this is the D matrix. Now, moment can be written as, we know that there are 3 moments like mx, my, mxy. So we are integrating out sigma x, sigma with the variation of z, So we get this matrix, and which is relating moment vector to the strain vector, which are nothing but the curvature vector. Okay, so this is the matrix which relates moment to the curvature. So this is the D matrix. Now, if I want to formulate this triangular plate element, which we know that there are 9 unknowns actually, right? So I have to follow some kind of a Pascal's triangle to choose the polynomial which should satisfy this requirement. We know that the Pascal triangle is written as the constant quantity which is required for the rigid body motion. Then you have linear quantities like x and y. Then you have quadratic quantities x square, x y, y square. So if I want to write down for a 9-noded plate element, I have to choose nine unknown, right? So if I count it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now out of these 4 things, I have to take 3 only, right? But if you see that if you take any of these 3, then there will be a geometric bisect to a particular Cartesian coordinate system. So what has been suggested as one of the solutions is, what you do is you sum this up like x square y and xy square. You sum this up and take it as one quantity, right? So that is what we have written as the unknown variable WE is a1 plus a2x plus a3y plus a4x square. This is the quadratic quantity. And from the third order polynomial, what we are doing is we are summing up one quantity and taking as 9 unknowns. So this is one of the possible solutions for a triangular plate element, to have 9 unknowns. Now, if you have this 9 unknowns, what you have to write down is you have to find out the nodal quantities. Like what we have written is, see, these are the nodal values, right? These are the nodal values like wi, theta xi, theta yi, wj, theta xj, theta yj, wm, theta xm, theta ym. So these are the 9 nodal quantities defined at 3 nodes, that is I, j, and m. And how they are related to these unknowns are a1, a2, a3, a9 is through some nodal coordinates. Because what we can see here, what we have defined here is a1, a2, a3, right? So if I substitute the coordinate of this particular node, suppose if I am looking for node number I, right? So node number I has coordinate of xi and yi. So because by discretizing this particular domain into various elements, I always know that what are the nodal coordinates. So I know xi, yi, xj, yj, and xm, ym, and all that. So if I substitute that in polynomial, I am able to populate this matrix. So that is why we call it this matrix as C matrix. So basically, this matrix is made of coordinates, nodal coordinates. So it's a C matrix. So by having this relation, we can always relate nodal values to the unknowns, right? But what we are seeing here is we don't know the unknowns, right? A1, A2, A3s are not known to us. So what we will do is we will inverse this matrix. So what we have here right now is the nodal displacement vector equal to some kind of a coordinate matrix multiplied by the unknowns, right? Now I am interested in knowing what is the value of A. So what I am doing is I am inverting this matrix. I am writing A equal to C inverse D. Okay. So this is now I C matrix I know because I have already discretized this particular element. I know xi, yi, and all other coordinates. So if I populate it, I know the nodal values, right? I can always find out what is the A matrix, A vector actually. Now, if I write down W, that is the polynomial, that is the field variable inside the domain of the plane. So it is written as a polynomial, that is 1 x y. This is the polynomial which we had chosen. So this is the L vector, and another is unknowns like a1, a2, a3, a4. So this is just I am writing W equal to a1 plus a2x and a3y and all that. So basically, this was the polynomial which we had chosen, right? Now I know the value of this a1, a2, a3 vector, right? So what I can do is I can substitute the value of these unknowns in terms of the nodal quantities, right? So I can write A equal to C inverse D. So this is the polynomial L. This A value has been replaced as C inverse D. So C inverse D. So basically what I am writing is W equal to some matrix which is multiplied by the D matrix, right? And D matrix is nothing but the nodal displacement vector. So we know that the matrix which relates nodal displacement vector to the field quantity, that is the unknown in the domain of the plate, is known as the shape function. So what LC inverse is giving us the shape function matrix. So that is what by doing this matrix we can always compute what will be the shape function for this thin plate element. Now if you know the B matrix, if you know the shape function matrix, we know that nothing but the second order derivative of this shape function, because W can always be written as NIWI. Okay. So if I do the second order derivative, I can always calculate what will be the value of the B matrix, right? So this is the second order derivative of the unknown displacement. This is if you take the second order derivative of this polynomial, we can always populate this matrix, right? Okay. So if you see that the fourth quantity, this is first, second, third, fourth. So if I take the second derivative of this, that is dou square w by dou x square, so I get a value of 2x and then 2. So I'm getting it here too, right? Similarly, you can argue for the other elements here. So this is basically the H matrix. H matrix is basically higher order derivative of this particular shape function matrix. So this is H. Now A again I'm substituting by C inverse D. So if I'm getting C inverse D, now again I know that the matrix which relates the nodal displacement vector to the state vector is known as the B matrix. So this is the B matrix. So we know that HC inverse is the B matrix, right? So now we have identified what is the D matrix, what is the shape function matrix, what is the B matrix. I can always write down what would be the stiffness matrix. So I'm saying KE equal to B transpose DB. That is our standard definition. I'm substituting the value of B and D matrix. So I'm getting HC inverse transpose of that D matrix HC inverse. I'm transposing it out and finding out the integration, right? So if you can see that all these matrices are constant values, so you get a constant stiffness matrix or constant stiffness value for a particular plate element, right? So this is all about the left hand side vector of the this equilibrium equation. As we know that in finite element technique, ultimately what we solve is Ku equal to F. Okay, Ku equal to F means K is the stiffness matrix, U is the unknown displacement vector, and F is nothing but the force vector, right? Now, as we are seeing that in this particular problem, what may be happening is the load is applied along in the domain of the plate, right? Now, if you are applying load on the domain of the plate, I need to have a mechanism, because we know that in finite element we can only apply load at the nodal location, right? So if you are pressurizing this plate structure, there should be some mechanism by which I should be able to transfer these loads to the nodal quantities, right? So the mechanism which has been given in finite element is you use some kind of a consistent approach. What we mean by consistent approach is we use the same shape function like this N transpose to distribute this pressure loading, which is in the domain of the structure, to calculate the nodal loads, right? So what we are doing is we are integrating this pressure loading with the help of this shape functions in the domain of the plate. Okay. So what we'll get is the right hand side vector is Q, that is the force vector, has got three terms emanating from node number I, node number J, and node number M. These are our initial node numbers which we had given to a thin plate element. And corresponding to that, we'll have three components, because we know that we have three unknowns like W, theta x, and theta y. So the load also will have three components, like the load which is responsible for the transverse displacement, that is W, load which is responsible for the theta x rotation, which is some kind of a moment, M of x, and similarly the moment which is responsible for the rotation y, that is theta y, right? So these are the three components, that is the load responsible for transverse displacement, load responsible for rotation about the axis of x, load responsible for the rotation about the axis of y, right? So one force and two moments, right? In case of structural elements like plate and beam, we classify it as there is moment and forces simultaneously present in the load vector. Now, if you substitute N as LC inverse, we know that LC inverse gives you the shape function, transpose of that, and we can write down what would be the kind of right hand side vector. So this will help us in finding out the nodal load vector, which will have forces and moments, right? So if I have the equilibrium equation like K into D equal to Q, I can always solve it by finding out the value of D. Okay, so then I will have the value of the nodal displacement vector like W, theta x, and theta y. Okay. Now we wanted to worry about these kind of elements which we are devising are basically a conforming element or a non-conforming element. I'll come little bit more about what is a conforming element or a non-conforming element. Just first, let us see whether what element we have devised is a conforming element or a non-conforming element. So what we know is WE, that is the nodal displacement vector. We had chosen this as polynomial for the field variable, right? We have 9 unknowns and all that. Now I have particularly oriented this element so that the mathematics become easy. So what I have done is I have aligned this particular element so that the edge 1, 2 is along the axis of y, okay, and the length of this edge is L here. Now, if I want to find out what is the variation of this W along the axis of y, this the equation of this line is x equal to 0. So I just substitute the value of x equal to 0 here. So W at x equal to 0 is, this is the quantity. We have substituted only x equal to 0 here. Now, if I want to find out what is the rotation of this particular edge, Okay, so w by dou y basically gives you the theta x. Okay, so basically this is theta x along the axis of y, that is x equal to 0. So what I have done is I have taken a partial derivative of this polynomial with respect to y, substituted the value of x equal to 0. I get this as the variation of this theta x along the axis of 1, 2. Similarly, if I want to find out theta y along the axis of y, we get this value, right? So these are the three equations which is valid all along the length of this particular element. Okay. Now, if I want to, because I have to calculate the nodal value. So now these equations are valid all along the length of this edge. Okay. Now, if I'm looking for a particular node, suppose at node number 1. So what I have is at node number 1, we know that x equal to 0, y equal to 0. So what I have to do is in this general equation, I have to put y equal to 0. So that is what I'm doing here, y equal to 0. So I'm getting the transverse displacement at node number 1 is a1, theta of x at node number 1 is a3, and theta of y at node number 1 is a2. So this has come from this general equation by substituting the value of y equal to 0. So I'm getting a1, a3, a2. Okay. So these are the values I have written here. Similarly, if I want to find out these nodal values at node number 2, suppose I have assumed that the element of the elemental length along this edge is L, small l. So I'm substituting the value of L here at the y equal to L. So this is W2, that is the transverse displacement at node number 2, theta x at node number 2, theta y at node number 2. Now, if I look at closely these values like W1, theta x1, theta y1, W2, theta x and theta y2, what I have here is in these equations, if I want to solve these equations, see I have A1, A3, A2, A1, A3, A6, A9. Okay, so 5 unknowns. Similarly, this, if I see that I have 7 unknowns. If I closely look at all these equations, I have 7 unknowns, right? 7 unknowns, and I have only 6 equations, right? So if I look at these 6 equations and I have 7 unknowns, so there is a difficulty, mathematical difficulty here. I cannot solve it uniquely. So that is what I have written here. We have 6 equations and 7 unknowns, namely as these things. So solution is unique. I cannot uniquely determine the solution, right? But what happens is if I look at these 2 equations, like W1, sorry, first equation A1, A3, and these 2 equations like W2 and theta x2. Okay, so that is A1, A3, A6, A9, A3, A6, A9. So if I look at closely at these 2 equations and these 2 equations, I have only 4 unknowns like A1, A3, A1, A3, A6, A9, A3, A6, A9, right? So what I conclude from saying analyzing these 4 equations is I can uniquely determine the value of W and theta x, but I have problems in determining the value of theta y, right? So if in such kind of scenario where we cannot uniquely determine a field, an unknown quantity, we call it non-conforming element, right? Also, we say that this for this particular age, the value of whatever the normal slope which will be calculating from this side of the element, and there will be some element which will be sitting on the other side of the mesh also. So if what I calculate normal slope from this side and this side will have some error. But as far as the transverse displacement along this length, along this edge from this side or this side is concerned, W continuity is guaranteed, and the slope along this edge is also guaranteed. Only thing, the slope of normal slope, continuity of normal slope is not guaranteed. So such kind of elements are known as non-conforming element, but still these are in use because of its simplicity, right? So in the conforming and non-conforming, guaranteed continuity of W and dou W by dou y, that is theta x, while continuity of dou W by dou x is not guaranteed. So these are known as non-conforming elements. Okay. Similarly, we can formulate a 4-noded element based on the similar ideology, like we have W, theta x, theta y. So basically, we have 4 nodes and 3 degrees of freedom at each node. So we'll get an element of we got a nodal displacement vector of 12 cross 1, because we have 4 nodes and 3 degrees of freedom. So for choosing Pascal's triangle, we can see that up to this level we had 10 unknown quantities. So we are choosing this and this. You could choose x4 and y4 as well. That will also not cause any geometric biasing. So this is one of the polynomial which I have shown here. This is rectangular plate element for a 3 degree of freedom element. Dou W by dou x, dou W by dou y. Similar methodology can be adopted for deriving the shape functions. What we said for the 3-noded triangular plate element. and these are the curvature vectors, and this is the now we say we may ask this question that whether this four noded 3 degrees of freedom element is conforming or non-conforming. So it can also be proved that that is also not conforming. And if you want to have the conformity of this element, what we have to do is we have to increase the degree of freedom, right? So what we have to devise is a element which should have an additional degree of freedom, which is known as dou square w by dou x dou y, right? So see, we were till now we were dealing with 3 degrees of freedom, that is dou w by dou x and dou w by dou y, and we have to add an additional degree of freedom, because as we are introducing an additional degree of freedom, so additional degree of complexity, additional computation, and then some kinds of the physical representation of twist may not be there in the boundary condition, so it may be difficult to employ such kind of boundary conditions. So it's a little more cumbersome. These are basically, theoretically speaking, these are the perfect elements, but non-conforming elements are also in use because of its simplicity. So if you are using this four-noded 4 degree of freedom element, so we'll have 16 degree of freedom rectangular plate element, and this kind of a polynomial which we have to choose from Pascal's triangle to devise the polynomial w of xy, right? So this was all about the formulation of thin plates elements which I wanted to discuss. So we have discussed the thin plate element, which is a 3 degree of freedom triangular plate element. Then we have discussed 3 degree of freedom rectangular plate element, and then we have devised, we have come out with a solution where we, by introducing an additional degree of freedom, we can have a conforming element, which will be a 16 degree of freedom rectangular plate element. Now, just to see what we have studied in this particular portion, how does it work? So I have taken a sample problem where we are trying to find out a central deflection and stresses for a simply supported rectangular plate. So the problem in hand is on the right hand side. What you are seeing is this is our actual structure. This is the rectangular plate, and the problem definition which is given here is determine deflection and stresses at the center of a simply supported rectangular plate subjected to uniformly distributed load, and use the following numerical data. So what they are saying is the dimension of this plate is 10 units cross 5 units, and the thickness of the plate is 0.2. So we can say that the smaller dimension of the plate is 5 divided by the thickness of the plate is 0.2. So 5 divided by 0.2 is coming to be 25. So if you say that 25 means R1 parameter is more than 10, so it really qualifies for our thin plate analysis. The E value is 10 to the power 6, nu value is 0.3, and Q value, which is the perpendicular load which is acting on this plate, is 10 units. So that is our problem definition. And what we have to do is we have to find out the stresses and the central deflection. Okay. So by virtue of the definition of this problem, we can say that as all the edges are simply supported and the structure is fully loaded, we can utilize the symmetricity of this problem. And what I propose is we can solve only the quarter of the geometry, right? So this is the model which we have taken. So this is the model which has been modeled using only one single element, 1, 2, 3, 4. It has got 4 corner nodes. So the element side, now if you look at the boundary condition, what we are saying is this element edge like 1, 2 is a simply supported edge. Similarly, like edge 1, 4 is a simply supported edge. Now we don't know the boundary condition of 3, 4 and 2, 3, right? But if you look at this plate, because of the virtue of boundary condition and loading condition, it is going to deform symmetrically, right? Like what I mean to say is the way this edge is going to deform, similar deformation is going to happen in this side of the plate. Similarly, whatever deformation is happening on this side of the edge, this side of the plate, similar is going to happen on this side of the plate. That is why we are doing the quarter symmetric model, right? So when the condition of boundary condition will come, we'll impose the right boundary condition so that it satisfies the requirement, right? So now if you see the elemental nodes, like there are 4 corner nodes, as it is given as 4 nodes, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we know the nodal coordinate is, suppose we are coordinate system is like starting from this node. So 0, 0, this is of dimension 10 into 5. So this x-axis dimension is 5, 0. Then this is 5, 2.5, and this is 0, 2.5, right? So that is the nodal coordinates. So 0, 0, 5, 0, 5, 5 by 2, 0, 5 by 2. These are the nodal coordinates. As we know that generally we in finite element we define an element by size of 2a, 2b, so that it is helpful in mapping. And in the parent coordinate system, it becomes -1 to +1 and things like that, right? So A value is 5 by 2, B value is 5 by 2, so that your element rectangular is of size 2A to B. Thickness is 0.2, E value is this, nu value is this, D matrix, that is the flexural rigidity of the plate, is this value, and this is the load applied, right? Now, if I populate this stiffness matrix, which we have already calculated using B transpose dB, right? And we know that because this is a rectangular plate and we have 3 degrees of freedom at each node, so the size of the stiffness matrix will be 12 cross 12. So basically, this is a 12 cross 12 matrix, which is nothing but a stiffness matrix, right? Now, if I have to impose this boundary condition, the boundary condition what we have is, if you look at this boundary condition along the edge 1 2, along the edge 1 2, because it is simply supported, so the deformation W in this direction is 0, right? Similarly, if you see the rotation about the axis of Y, okay, so that is axis of Y is axis of X, theta X. If you see that along 1 4, this is along 1, we are talking about along 1 4, right? So this particular edge cannot rotate about the axis of X, okay? So that is theta X equal to 0, and theta X we know that is nothing but dou W by dou Y, right? And similarly, for we can argue for side 1 2, that is side 1 2 here, side 1 2 here, this edge cannot rotate about axis of Y, Y, yeah, so this is theta Y equal to 0, so theta Y equal to 0. Now comes to the boundary condition, sorry. Along the axis of side 2 3, if you look at the side 2 3, this is side 2 3 and side 3 4 are the symmetric boundary condition, right? Now, if you look at the symmetric boundary condition, as this plate is going to deform in the downward direction, this side edge 2 3 is not going to rotate about the axis of Y, right? I hope you agree with that. The axis of the side 2 3 is not going to rotate about the axis of Y. So what we have put boundary condition is theta Y equal to 0. Similarly, if you argue for the symmetric boundary condition for the edge 3 4, it is not going to rotate about the axis of X, okay? So theta X equal to 0. So if you translate this boundary condition along the node, because these are the edge conditions. So as we know that the node number 1 is common to side 1 4 and 1 2. This is a common. So we'll find out boundary condition like W theta X and theta Y equal to 0. And we are saying that degree of freedom 1 is W, degree of freedom 2 is theta X, and degree of freedom 3 is theta Y. So for node number 1, both all these 3 degrees of freedom 1 2 3 are 0. Similarly, for node number 2, which is common in side 1 2 and side 2 3, what we have is W equal to 0, theta Y equal to 0, right? So we are saying that node number 2, 1 is 0 and 2 is 0. Similarly, for node number 3, degree of freedom 2 and 3 are 0. Similarly, for node number 4, the degree of freedom W and theta Y is 0, right? So these are the essential boundary conditions which we need to impose. And as we know that when you apply this boundary condition Ku equal to F, what we have to do is we have to knock out those particular rows and columns which are corresponding to this 0 degrees of freedom, right? So what we have to do is, because for node number 1, 2, 3 is 0, and for node number 2, degree of freedom 1 is 0. So we will only have a particular element which is coming into this reduced matrix after imposition of boundary condition, which is fifth from the column and row, right? So what we can see here is I can show it here. This particular thing. This is one row number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this we are getting, right? What we are getting is fifth row, right? So fifth row and fifth column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So first element which will get after imposition of boundary condition is 2021.98. So that is 2021.98 is the first element you'll get. Similarly, we can argue for the other elements of this matrix, which reduced matrix, which we have come from after incorporation of essential boundary condition. Similarly, the right hand side vector is this. Now we know that after imposition of boundary condition, we can solve for these unknowns. Like they are the only 3 unknowns, because these 9 degrees of freedoms are already 0, right? So we have only 3 unknowns to calculate. So these 3 unknowns we can calculate from this Ku equal to F. So these are the solution of this global equation. Now, if you know that what are the interpolation functions, these are the various shape functions, and these are the, if you populate this nodal degree of freedom vector, so there are 9 zeros, and these are the 3 values which we have calculated, right? So if you write down the nodal degree of freedom vector by imposing this solution vector as well, we'll get this 12 cross 1 actually, 12 cross 1 nodal displacement freedom vector. These are the curvature values which we can always calculate because we know the W value. So we can find out W dou square W by dou x square and things like that. And these are the moment values, and these are the shear force vector. So this is the moment, this is the shear force. Now, having known the moment and shear forces, we can always calculate what will be the variation of sigma x, sigma y, tau x, y, and transverse shear stresses. And you can calculate what is the value of these stresses at that particular nodal location. So this is the value which we have calculated. So the point I wanted to emphasize was, see the value of maximum in-plane stresses, what we are getting. These are the maximum in-plane stresses. What do you mean by maximum in-plane stresses are? This is sigma x, this is sigma y, and this is nothing but in-plane shear stress tau xy, right? And these are shears means transverse shear stresses. Transverse shear stresses, this is the value 21 and 73, right? So what we have done, see, we have applied a load of 10, right? So what we are getting is tau xz and tau yz are 20 and 73, right? So this is what we had done in the assumption also that it could be of the order of 10 times the applied load. So this is in that order, right? And the maximum in-plane stresses like bending stress sigma x, sigma y, and in-plane shear stress tau xy, what we had said was it would be the order of something around that second order thing. So what we are getting is in thousands, right? Order of thousands. So what we had assumed that the in-plane sigma zz can be neglected as compared to the in-plane stresses and the transverse shear stresses is true, right? Which is coming out from this analysis. And this is the value which you can always do by post-processing. You can calculate at each and every nodal location what is the deformation and all that. And because this is a simple problem, so we also know that what is the exact solution of this kind of problem. So there is a series solution available for this problem, and it gives you the maximum deflection of 0.086, which is not very close to the numerical solution, which is 0.11. But as you see that we have taken only one element for the solution. So as we take more and more elements, we'll converge to the exact solution, right? The point I want to emphasize here is the deformation what we are getting here is more than the closed form solution, right? Which is contrary to the definition of finite element method, which says that the stiffness of finite elements are always more than the stiffness of the actual structure. That is why we always get solution, a deformation solution, which is less than the closed form solution. But what we are getting here is more than the closed form solution. This is happening because of what we are using is a non-conforming element, right? But I can always assure you that although this because of only one element you are getting it 0.114, which is very close to 0.086. But if you take some 4 elements or 8 elements, you reach very close to the closed form solution. The only difference for non-conforming element is the convergence will be from the more the value, and it will come to the converged value, a closed form solution. While for all other conforming elements, all our bar element, beam element, and 3D element, the convergence will be always from the bottom side. But for non-conforming elements, convergence will be from the top side. So this is what I wanted to talk about for thin plates. The time is less. Otherwise, I wanted to cover 3D thick elements, thick plate elements, and then talk about shear locking and all that, middling plate element, and then non-linear analysis. I had planned it a lot, but I don't think time is permitting me to do that. It's already 11:13. So we will talk about it maybe sometime other opportunity arises. So just I have some few more slides which I wanted to definitely say about it. So what we are saying is there are some golden rules in finite element method that there are elements must be connected at nodes. That is for sure that whatever we are meshing it, they must be connected at nodes. Otherwise, the side adjacent mesh may not know there is a mesh in the side of that. So it must be connected. Forces and boundary condition can only be applied at nodes, and then do not apply a fixed boundary condition and a force in the same direction at a node. You apply a force. So the fixed boundary condition and force, if you are applying in the same direction, it doesn't carry any meaning actually. Then finite element model versus structure. Finite element model of any structure is not the structure. So what we assume that whatever we have modeled is actually representing the structure is not true. Depends on how much detail we have modeled, like how much accurate our geometry is, how much accurate our material model is, how much accurate our boundary conditions are, and things like that. So whatever we are predicting from finite element, may not exactly match to the experimental deformation. So we should know that what are the limitations of finite element model. The details of the finite element model strongly affect the accuracy of the predicted displacement and stresses within the structure. So whatever detail we have put in the model, it affects the accuracy of the result. Then, for example, suppose if you are modeling, if you have a structure which is connected to the other structure through a loose pin, because for assembly we will need some kind of a tolerance. So if you are having a loose pin for the movement's sake or whatever, and in the finite element model, if you are assuming a zero clearance, that there is no displacement allowed between these two, so then the deformation will never match to the finite element prediction, because in the finite element model we have not modeled that clearance. So that kind of error will always be there. So we need to take care of that. Then finite element analysis, for any engineering analysis software, we must understand whatever software package we are using. We must understand what are the assumptions and which element can do what all and all that. Then examine, critique every result with simple checks. We should always do the simple checks and balances to know whether the result is meaningful or not. Because any finite element package we are using will give some result, right? So whether the results are accurate or not, we have to ensure. Examine the results. Do we make some sense? Make a mechanics of materials check calculation to ensure that the results are within the right order of magnitude. And reconfirm the finite element model represent the physical system. Like I went to say geometry, material properties, boundary condition, applied loads, whether actually everything has gone in model or not. Then only we can ensure that whatever model is predicting will be matching close to the experimental result. Although experiments will have many more variation parameters, but at least we can assume that the results will be close to the experimental results, right? So I closely follow the book of R.D. Cook. At one point of time, one point of this description, he has written a finite element method makes a good engineer better and a bad engineer dangerous. So I agree with him that if you are using finite element method for doing any structure analysis or whatever, and if you are not understanding the underlying assumption, you are not applied properly, then sometimes it could be dangerous also. So we need to do as an engineer, it is our duty to check whatever finite element results we are getting. It is making some sense, and whatever we have modeled is as per the result expected or experimental trials and all that, right? So with this, I thank you all, and if there are any questions, I am happy to answer it.
Thank you, Dr. Dureja. Very
Thank you.
nice, very nice listening to you. There is
Thank
a question that one participant has asked. I'll read it from the chat box for him.
Yeah.
In case of shell element formulation using Kirchhoff's theory,
Yeah.
the in-plane and bending deformations are considered to be uncoupled.
Mhm.
And to do that, we consider the fictitious degree of freedom as in-plane rotation.
Correct.
Is there any way to carry out the shell element deformation using coupled in-plane and bending deformation? Please guide.
Yeah, see, as far as shell elements are concerned, we have 3D degenerated shell elements, right? It's a detailed formulation. See, if you look into any finite element package, whatever shell elements is used, it's a basically 3D degenerated shell element which takes care of coupled deformation. See, what we study in books is just for sake of simplicity, we assume that the drilling degree of freedom, that is theta z, is uncoupled, right? So we basically have we basically devise a finite element for 5 degree of freedom, like 3 displacements like UV and W, and there are 2 rotations like theta x and theta y, and we assume that the drilling degree of freedom, that is theta z, is not present, or even if it's present, it is having a very small magnitude, right? So that way is basically uncoupled. But if you look at any finite element package, whatever self element formulation is used, it uses a 3D degenerated shell element, which takes care of all 6 degrees of freedom.
Okay, there is no more question. Some of the people are writing in the text box that, they are thankful to you for the wonderful session. It was very informative. And further, during this discussion, he has also talked to us about, the fundamentals of mechanics of plates in the beginning. And after the brief introduction to the mechanics, he has very nicely explained us the thin plate formulation using finite elements. And, that was really interesting to listen. He has also at the end of the session, he has very importantly given, as many other experts have given before, some warnings for carrying out correct finite element analysis. He has given to us many clues which can be readily applied as a checklist at the, when you are actually carrying out finite element analysis for your application in future. So, and he very nicely ended his session with a quote from a very popular author, R.D. Cook, and that reminded me of my classes, finite element analysis, finite element method classes at IIT Bombay, when Professor Seshu, who happens to be guide of Dr. Dureja, used to teach us, and after teaching every chapter, at the end he will say that, but note that this is an approximate method, this is an approximate method, and that we must have to think about some physical checks, which when we apply, we can confirm that the results are going to be correct. So it was very interesting, Dr. Dureja, to listen to you. And I must tell you my personal experience about this session, that the formulation of the plates for finite elements I have heard for the first time from you. So it's going to be a memorable